I was born in a small town on the East Coast and, from childhood, grew used to neat streets, wooden fences, and warm porch conversations. My name is Zach, and for a long time I believed that, despite all the ups and downs of life, the most important thing in the world was trust. My mother once told me, "Don't be afraid to have faith in people. By doing that, we make the world a brighter place together." Her words stayed with me forever, though she passed away when I was still a teenager. Yet, some lessons require not just beautiful words, but one's own painful experience to grasp their full depth. And that was precisely the lesson I had to learn recently when I faced the most devastating betrayal in my life. She was the girl I believed to be perfect. Her name was Emily, and we met during our college years somewhere in the Midwest. I still remember the day I first saw her. A slim girl in a pastel-colored sweater, handing out flyers for a charity concert. I was immediately drawn by her smile, so calm and warm, as if reflecting all the goodness that could be found in the world. We struck up a conversation, and I jokingly asked if I would look silly coming to the concert alone. She laughed and said she'd be happy to see me in any company, even if I came solo. We exchanged numbers, and from that point on, my life took on completely new colors. College days were jam-packed with socializing, late-night hangouts, and endless planning for the future. I often dropped by her dorm, and we'd spend hours in the library prepping for exams, still managing to gossip and fool around. During that time, I felt incredibly happy. It seemed like fate had finally turned its face toward me and offered me something truly precious. I noticed how she took great care of my gifts and jotted down every detail of our time together in her journal. I loved watching her sleep in the mornings, snuggled up close to me. I loved how she laughed at my silly jokes and was so empathetic whenever I talked about my mom. She became my support and my best friend. It felt like we were both eager to open up to each other more deeply than people related by blood. I remember us visiting my relatives in Virginia. A warm welcome, a barbecue under the old elm tree, and conversations that went on late into the night. My cousins nodded approvingly. "She's a good one. Take care of her, Zach." And I truly believed I would. Emily and I made grand plans. We dreamed about a house by a lake, where we'd start our mornings with the gentle sound of the wind and freshly ground coffee. We were ready to take out loans, save up, buy a small condo in the city, and, later on, something bigger where we could settle for years. Time went by, and we graduated. I found a job in an advertising and marketing firm. Emily decided to pursue further studies. She wanted to get a master's in sociology, then work for a nonprofit doing community projects. I was so proud of her. She was always the kind of person who cared about making the world better. I recalled a day we volunteered at an animal shelter and how her eyes glowed with joy as puppies ran around her. We rented a cozy apartment in an old brick building. Every evening I'd come home, trying to think of ways to make her happy. Ordering her favorite double cheese pizza, cooking shrimp pasta, giving her a shoulder rub after her long hours at the library. She appreciated my gestures, and I believed everything was going perfectly. We weren't just boyfriend and girlfriend. We were partners and best friends, like in a romantic comedy where the leads have been inseparable since childhood and stay together forever. But real life isn't always what it seems. Sometimes you wake up and realize that life has started sending you strange, alarming signals. At first, I paid them no mind. Emily began going out more often in the evenings, saying she had to stay at the university until late for her research. I didn't doubt her for a second, knowing how hardworking and driven she was. Sometimes I wondered if I, as her boyfriend, might not be giving her enough attention since I was also working overtime on a complicated project. We hardly saw each other except in the mornings or near midnight, both of us exhausted and sleep-deprived. We'd give each other a quick hug, and I'd reassure myself, "It's just temporary. We'll be back to normal soon." Then I noticed she was texting on her phone more frequently, stepping out onto the balcony to talk. One day, I accidentally saw the name Brandon on her screen. I knew a Brandon from her department, a tall, tan guy, an athlete, yet bright enough to do well in his studies. He seemed friendly, although we'd never really talked much. When I asked Emily about it, she said he was just a classmate who needed help with a presentation. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? I had no reason to distrust her, and I simply couldn't imagine her betraying everything we'd carefully built over so many years. But soon, small lapses appeared. I noticed how she'd go quiet whenever her phone buzzed. Still, I chalked it up to her being tired and our overall stress. A demanding master's program, plus my job with tight deadlines, left us no time for carefree hanging out. One evening, I came home early and found Emily locked in the bathroom with her phone. I heard her whispering. When she came out, I asked what was up, but she brushed it off, saying she was talking with a friend from college who was going through a rough time. I believed her, though a nagging feeling of strangeness lingered. During the following days, life felt foggy. I saw how she carefully timed her exits. "I told you we're forming a new study group," she'd repeat, trying to sound convincing. I hated being suspicious. It went against everything I believed in and all my desire to trust her as the good person I knew her to be. For the first time in my life, I felt the sting of jealousy gnawing at me. But I kept telling myself it was just a tough stretch and that we'd eventually talk things through. I was convinced that once her thesis defense was behind us, we'd both take a short vacation, maybe head to California to see my childhood friends, Jason and Mia. They'd been inviting us for a while, promising to show us the coastal area where we could bike during the day and sit around a campfire on the beach at night. I thought that trip would refresh our relationship, but fate had other plans, and I'll never forget the night when all my growing doubts crystallized into a harsh reality. We were in the living room. I was half occupied by work emails on my laptop, and she was typing away on her phone. I glanced at her and noticed her startled expression as soon as she realized I was watching. She immediately locked her screen. A heavy silence filled the room. I felt a horrible chill rise inside me. It was just a split second, but it changed everything. I asked if she needed help or if she wanted to talk, but she abruptly stood up, saying she had to call her dad about some family issues. She went into the bedroom and closed the door. A wave of dread washed over me. I couldn't just sit there pretending nothing was wrong anymore. I silently approached the bedroom door, cracked it open, and heard her say, "I miss you too, and I'll figure out how we can meet this week, okay?" Then she added, "Please don't text me here so often. Zach might suspect something." In that moment, it felt like thunder crashed in my ears, and my heart clenched so hard I could barely breathe. There are no words to describe the pain I felt. All my fears and doubts crystallized in an instant. I was terrified to walk in, afraid of doing something irreversible before understanding the situation. So I went back to the living room, sat in an armchair, and closed my eyes, trying to control my pounding heart. When she finally returned, I asked in a steady voice, "Who were you talking to?" She hesitated for a second and then lied, "My dad." My lips automatically formed the words, "And why would you need to hide from your dad that you have a boyfriend?" She froze, blushing, and the air instantly filled with tension, like something burning without smoke but still choking you with the stench of betrayal. I didn't make a scene. I needed time. She began stammering about family problems and how I misunderstood everything, but I wasn't listening anymore. I saw a stranger before me, someone who had just lied to my face effortlessly. I hardly slept that night. I tossed and turned, replaying memories, searching for excuses, feeling sudden flares of anger and sharp stabs of betrayal. I refused to believe Emily could do this, yet that snippet of conversation was painfully clear. The next morning, I got up, said nothing, took a shower, dressed, and went to the office, hoping my work could numb the pain. But deep down, I knew nothing could erase her whispered plea. "Please don't text me here so often. Zach might suspect something." At my desk, I tried to focus on numbers, texts, and planning, but my hands were shaking, and my head was exploding with contradictions. I kept replaying her smile, her gentle touch, all the comforting words she'd given me over the years, and I couldn't fathom how I'd ever be able to look into her eyes again or cope with the wave of bitterness consuming me. Desperate to confirm my worst suspicions, I decided to check her social media during my lunch break. Normally, I'd never snoop through her phone or spy on her messages. I had always believed in her honesty. But now, I felt like a drowning man, grabbing at any scrap of information that might give me clarity. I found some photos of her and Brandon, pictures from the university, apparently for some joint project. They looked so close, smiling in a way that suggested a deeper bond. Being just friends is one thing, but those gazes were full of something intimate. My suspicions only hardened, and a gnawing question burned inside me. How long has this been going on? That evening when I got home, Emily was in the kitchen looking defeated. She could sense my detachment, but pretended everything was normal. I sat across from her and said, "We need to talk." She tensed up, and I saw her hands trembling. I didn't want to shout or break down into fits, even though the pain inside me was gut-wrenching. I simply wanted answers, straight, honest answers, though I feared the truth might break me for good. She started making excuses, saying it was just a misunderstanding, that she was helping Brandon with an important project, and he needed emotional support. I watched her closely, trying to see if she was genuinely trying to convince herself as well as me, or if she no longer believed her own words. I told her what I'd heard through the door, and she fell silent. Guilt and fear shone in her eyes. Then came a weak attempt to say that I'd misunderstood the conversation, that it was just a fragment of some bigger discussion, and she was only trying to avoid upsetting me. I stayed quiet, attempting to maintain my composure while inside every part of me screamed, "Why can't you just admit you have someone else? Why do you make me feel like I'm crazy for suspecting something that's obviously true?" I bluntly asked, "Are you sleeping with him?" She stared at me for a long moment, biting her lips. Finally, she choked out, "Zach, it's not that simple." That phrase was the final confirmation that our relationship was changed forever. Everything we had until then now seemed like a fragile illusion that had collapsed into dust. That night, I barely slept again. In the morning, we could hardly look at each other. I didn't know how to go on living. Part of me wanted to pack up and leave, but another part was still clinging to the hope that she was telling me the truth, that it was nothing serious. Normally, I would never accept even the thought of such a betrayal, but my love for her was so strong that I was prepared to give her a second chance. I told myself, maybe she's just overwhelmed. Once we talk it through, we can handle it together. But she kept avoiding me, saying she had too much work, too much stress. I asked if I could help, come to campus with her, maybe talk about the project, but she brushed me off every time. One evening, I even tried following her when she said she was going to university. I parked outside and waited in my car. An hour went by, then 2, 3, still no sign of Emily coming out. Finally, I saw Brandon appear at a side exit, glancing around. Moments later, she joined him. They exchanged a few words and walked off together toward a car that headed to a nearby cafe. I followed them, my heart pounding. Through the cafe window, I watched them sitting face to face, and the look she gave him told me everything. She gazed at him with a tenderness that should have been saved for me. Then he gently placed his hand over hers, and she held on to his fingers. I felt something break inside me. I didn't know what to do. Storm in there, yelling? Or stay put, silently watching them destroy all my hopes? I chose the latter. Not because I lacked the courage, but because seeing them so intimately stunned me. I needed time to process it. They left the cafe, and I followed them back to campus. I saw Emily give him a brief kiss before heading to the bus stop, almost as if she didn't want him to drive her home so as not to be seen together. My face burned with humiliation, and rage simmered in my chest. I realized I was gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles had turned white. I wanted to smash everything, to confront them right there, but I just sat motionless, forced to watch my girlfriend step onto a bus after kissing another man. Back in our apartment, I had no idea what decisions lay ahead or how far this would all go. I never could have predicted the chain of humiliations, empty promises, agonizing conversations, and finally the ultimate collapse that comes only after a real betrayal. But by then it was already sealed. I sat in my car, hands on the wheel, wondering what to do with my shattered dreams, my thirst for revenge, and the sorrow that was now my constant companion. Her affair had infected my veins, pushing me to weigh every possible scenario. Back then, I still hoped we could fix things, though the bitter truth was pounding in my mind, warning me that some betrayals are impossible to undo, and that returning to the way things used to be might be beyond reach. The following days after witnessing Emily with Brandon were pure torment. I tried to act normal, but inside, I was weighed down by hopelessness. Each time she spoke to me, I recalled that cafe scene, her hand on his, her tender smile, the gentle look she used to give me. I couldn't handle it. Sometimes I'd collapse onto the living room couch, eyes closed, wishing it was just a nightmare that would vanish by morning. But reality was more merciless than any bad dream. Eventually, I realized I couldn't live in constant deceit. I needed a direct, honest conversation, something that might be our final moment, but would at least free me from passively watching everything implode. I waited until evening when she returned. I followed her into the bedroom, shut the door, and said, "Emily, I know you're involved with Brandon. I saw you together." She went pale, her lips trembled, but she tried to argue, "Zach, you've got it all wrong." I cut her off, asking why she was hiding, why she was lying, why I was condemned to live in this hell of jealousy and fear when we could just name things for what they were. She burst into tears, saying she still loved me but had feelings for Brandon that started as friendship and turned into flirting. She insisted she never wanted to hurt me and that maybe it was just a passing infatuation. I listened, anger rising. How could she claim to love me while continuing an affair on the side? She swore she'd fix it, that she was confused, and begged me to give her time to figure things out. I stood a few steps away, feeling my entire world topple over. I wanted to scream, smash things, and tell her how she'd killed my faith in our shared future. Instead, I told her, "You have 1 week to decide what you want in life. Either you're with me and you cut things off with him completely, or—" The words stuck in my throat. I didn't even want to say them. But I had to. "Or we're done." She sobbed, promising she'd decide and swearing she never intended such drama. I didn't reply, just went to the living room, turned on the TV at full volume, drowning out the sound of her crying behind the door. The next day, once again, I only glimpsed her in the morning and near midnight. She'd leave for what she said were long hours on campus, and I couldn't bring myself to force the situation, though the urge to know her every move was ripping me apart. I felt humiliated, yet somehow still dependent on her choice. It was unbearable. 2 more agonizing days passed in which we barely spoke, just a few trivial sentences about food or chores, no hugs or warmth. I spent hours online, reading articles about psychology and how to handle infidelity, but no advice could mute my pain. It felt like I was alone in this nightmare, and no one could truly understand what it's like to watch someone who once swore love so mercilessly destroy your faith in a shared future. On the 3rd morning, I went to work, struggling to focus on an important client meeting from another state. But my mind was elsewhere, fixated on Emily's whereabouts. After lunch, unable to stand it, I drove to the university again. I parked and waited by the entrance. Before long, I saw her emerge from the building with Brandon, who placed his jacket over her shoulders. I snapped. I got out of my car and walked toward them, my heart pounding like crazy, my head filled with the thought, she's acting like everything's fine, letting him put his arm around her in broad daylight. She froze when she saw me. I looked Brandon straight in the eye. "You enjoying sleeping with my girlfriend?" He seemed taken aback for a moment, then tried to defend himself. "Dude, it's not what you think." But I cut him off. "I saw your hugs, your secret meetings. Don't pretend to be my friend." He frowned, glanced at Emily, who tried to intervene. "Zach, stop. Let's not make a scene out here." I couldn't keep it in any longer. I needed to speak my piece, to show her and him I wasn't a doormat. I blurted out everything that had built up inside me, that I'd followed them, seen their kiss, overheard her saying she missed him. I didn't care that people were watching. To me, it was just the 2 of them and my pain, which had taken over my entire world. I don't remember all my words, only that Brandon tried to say yes. They'd developed feelings but didn't know where it would lead. Emily looked from him to me, tears streaming down her face. For a second, I pitied her, but then I reminded myself that the only one who deserved pity was the person betrayed, not the betrayer. Ultimately, I turned around and left. I didn't want more public drama. I hated that our private conflict had spilled out where strangers could see it, but part of me felt oddly relieved, like I'd finally pulled out a thorn from my chest. I returned to our apartment, knowing everything had changed. The things in it no longer felt like ours, but rather relics of a broken dream. I grabbed my phone, sat on the couch, and scrolled through old photos of me and Emily, once the happiest couple I'd ever known. Then I deleted most of them. I didn't want to wallow in those memories, even though I'd once thought I'd keep them forever. That evening, she came back. I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly. She, clearly on edge, sat down and started apologizing, saying this had gone too far, that she never meant to push me to this. She asked if I'd listen, claiming she was confused and never intended to hurt me, that she had feelings for Brandon, but also didn't want to lose me, and that she needed help and time. I listened quietly, realizing she wanted to keep me close while still not giving him up, to have it both ways. Part of me was screaming to kick her out, while the other part, the one still in love, recalled the warmth we once had. I said if she truly wanted to save anything between us, she'd have to break it off with him completely. Block him everywhere, erase his number, stop meeting him. She stayed silent for several long minutes and then said, "I'm not sure if I can do that. I need another day or two to decide." My heart twisted. I understood that if you truly care about someone, you don't keep them on hold while you stay involved with someone else. Those words felt like a verdict. She wasn't willing to give up Brandon, so everything else was just empty promises. That night was one of the hardest of my life. I stared at the ceiling, imagining her telling me tomorrow that she chose him and wondering how I'd go on. She was everything to me. We'd built this entire future together. I thought about couples therapy, but it seemed pointless if she wouldn't cut ties with him. My pride and my heart were locked in a lopsided battle, and I felt utterly drained. I just wanted it to end, no matter the outcome. Anything was better than this agony. In the morning, I got up early and slipped out without a word. I drove to my friend James's place. We'd known each other since college. I could tell him everything without feeling ashamed of my weakness. Over coffee in his kitchen, I poured out the whole story, admitting my own parts in it. James listened, then said, "Zach, I get you're hurting, but don't underestimate your own self-worth. If she can't decide, she's already decided, and not in your favor." His words hit me like a punch to the gut because I sensed he was right, though I clung to a faint hope. When I returned to our apartment, I saw that Emily had packed some things and was sitting with her phone in hand. She said she was going to stay with a friend until she sorted herself out. I felt my insides collapse, but I showed no emotion. I simply nodded and said, "Fine, whatever." She walked by me, looked like she wanted to give me a hug, but I pulled away. We exchanged a few meaningless words, and she left. There I was, alone in the apartment, staring at empty walls that, just a day before, had been filled with warmth for two. And that was the point of no return. From that day onward, a new phase of my life would begin, one where I had to learn to live without her, without our shared story, without the dreams we'd once cherished. Above all, I had to learn to believe again that I could ever trust another person. But that path would bring me face to face with rage, despair, and the remnants of a love left buried under the rubble. That evening, in an apartment once so full of us, I broke down in tears for the first time in a long while. Sometimes the pain is so great you can't simply step over it. You have to let it burn through you and hope it leaves room for something new, maybe scarred, but still alive. She didn't come back after a day or two. A week passed, and I somehow survived, still going to work, trying to keep it together while I felt destroyed inside. At night, I pictured her lying next to him, or talking to him, in the same gentle tone she once used for me. Those mental images ate away at the person I used to be. I felt as though I wasn't just losing her, but a piece of my identity too, because our lives had been so intertwined. Her stuff was everywhere. In closets, on shelves, in the kitchen. Each time I stumbled upon something, a sweater I gave her for Christmas, her recipe book, a random hair clip on the dresser, I felt an electric jolt of sorrow. I didn't know what to do with these items. Throwing them away felt terrifying, as if I'd be erasing the last remnants of us. But leaving them out in plain sight was unbearable, because each was another stab to my heart. Sometimes I'd hold her hoodie to my face, inhaling a trace of her perfume, which only twisted the knife deeper. One night when things felt especially bleak, I called James Ames and asked him to come over. We stayed up almost until sunrise while he tried to distract me with talk about music, movies, even politics. But I realized the world outside my room kept moving. People kept talking, working, marrying, divorcing, while I was stuck in a spot of unending grief, unable to step forward or back. James convinced me to see a therapist, and while I didn't know if it would help, I figured it couldn't hurt. At my first appointment with Dr. Roberts, I couldn't form two coherent sentences because mentioning her name brought a lump to my throat. But slowly, after several sessions, I began to open up, pouring out my bitterness and resentment. The therapist helped me see my pain as natural, that I wasn't required to forgive everything instantly or try to save a relationship so poisoned by deceit. Yet, despite the logic, my heart stubbornly clung to the hope she might return, apologize, and we'd start afresh from square one. Then, a few days later, when I was almost resigned to the idea she had chosen Brandon for good, she called me late at night. Her voice was quiet, shaky. She said she missed me and couldn't get used to being without us. I clutched the phone like a lifeline. "So are you coming back?" I asked. She just sighed and said, "I'm not sure. Let's meet and talk. Maybe it's not as bad as it seems." My battered heart, despite all the warnings from my brain, beat in sync with hope again. I agreed. We arranged to meet the next day at a small cafe where we used to love having breakfast. I arrived early and sat at our favorite window table, the same one where we used to joke that the coffee was so strong and the waitress, Mrs. Ellen, felt like a grandmother to everyone. My whole body trembled. I longed to see her, but was also terrified. When she walked in, I saw she looked exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes and noticeably thinner. She sat down across from me, and we just stared at each other, neither of us speaking. Finally, I asked, "Emily, what is going on? Do you even know?" She said she'd been miserable the entire time, trying to figure out which one of us she truly wanted. She admitted she couldn't stop thinking about me, but also couldn't deny her feelings for Brandon. At that moment, I realized she might be physically present, but was emotionally somewhere else. We couldn't come to terms because she kept stalling, unwilling to pick sides, and I, deep down, knew I'd already lost if she didn't leave him the instant I found out. I sensed a chilling emptiness inside me, where my love for her used to be. I could see that clinging to someone who didn't know who they really wanted was only prolonging the agony. I mustered the strength to say, "If you're not sure, that itself is an answer. I won't wait around for you to finish playing this game." She burst into tears. It hurt to see her suffering, but I still couldn't grasp why she wouldn't just say, "I choose you." End of story. Maybe she really was stuck in some emotional labyrinth, or maybe she simply loved the attention of two men vying for her. Either way, I knew I couldn't stay in limbo any longer. We parted that day with a heavy feeling that a great chasm had opened between us, impossible to mend. I paid for the coffee, walked outside into the cold wind that lashed against my face, making it feel raw. Days passed, and the wound slowly began to scab over. I still thought of her, but not with that initial piercing pain. I kept seeing the therapist and talked about everything with James. Sometimes anger flared up, and I'd hate Brandon, his grin, his confidence, the fact that he took my girlfriend. I pictured him enjoying her company, and my blood boiled. But then I'd think maybe my fury was misplaced, and that if anyone deserved my anger, it was the person who promised loyalty and a future with me. Relationships are always about two people. If she hadn't wanted this, nothing would have happened. Over time, I realized I was slowly moving forward. I no longer waited for her calls, no longer held out for a miraculous reconciliation. I simply lived each day, hunting for anything that might bring a bit of joy, no matter how small. I got up early to hit the gym, running off my frustration on the treadmill or in the park, where the rhythmic pounding of my feet provided an odd peace of mind. I helped James with his startup project. Got immersed in work so deeply that sometimes hours would pass without a single thought of Emily. Yes, I wasn't fully healed, but each day without her, each tiny step, helped me relearn how to exist. Not long after, I found out through a mutual friend that Emily had officially moved in with Brandon. Oddly enough, instead of the stabbing pain I expected, I felt a weary relief. As though I finally had confirmation our chapter was closed. Maybe, in some hidden corner of my heart, I still loved her, but I realized she'd made her choice, and now I had to make mine. To choose myself. It hurt, but no longer so cripplingly as in the beginning. And so, at this point in my story, I finally spotted a glimmer of hope. Not hope for us to reunite, but for me to manage a life that wasn't dominated by self-torment or cursing her name. I understood people make mistakes, sometimes cruel ones. Betrayal can be physical or emotional. And emotional betrayal is the hardest to bear. Still, life doesn't end with one act of treachery, no matter how painful. I still had myself, which meant I had a chance to build a new relationship grounded in more honesty and fewer illusions. By now, quite some time has passed since she left. Some mornings out of habit, I still half expect her to come over and hug me or give me a gentle forehead kiss like she used to. And each time I realize she's gone, I feel a pang of sadness, but it's not the same all-consuming grief. People come into our lives to teach us something, sometimes something harsh, and when they fail our trust, they leave. We go on a little stronger, though a bit scarred. After all, any betrayal is also a chance to test ourselves. Can we forgive and move on, creating space for something new and healthier? I've started viewing the world differently now, with a clearer sense of how fragile relationships can be, and how crucial it is not to lose yourself for someone else. Yes, we need to trust, but we should never abandon our own identity. If someone decides to betray us, that's their choice. Our choice is how to respond and move on. I may not know what other pains life will throw at me, but I do know that I've learned to value my own boundaries and respect myself enough not to let anyone treat me like a backup option. And that's how my story with Emily ended. An affair that began in love but collapsed in betrayal, initially breaking me and then forging a stronger spirit. It took months to calm my soul, to stop flinching at the mention of her name, and to let go of that picture-perfect vision of happiness we both created and then destroyed. But today, when I look at my reflection, I see a person who can still smile and keep moving forward. There might be something better on the horizon, and I'm ready for it. No longer ashamed of my tears or my mistakes. May they remain in the past, a harsh lesson, but also a reminder that if you want someone to take care of you, you must cherish honesty, love, and trust in return.